Hello, welcome to P Cube, the original Pokemon Cube podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Martin, brought to you with co-host Connor Lavelle. Connor, welcome back. It's been a couple years, but here we are with a Cube podcast.
Indeed, here we are back again with the Cube podcast. Very excited to be back, and we had made a couple of attempts to get back on it, and they had fallen through mostly because of scheduling. It's been a little bit of a challenge for both of us, I think, but really excited to be able to record some more content because so many things have happened in the Cube space since we did record our last episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Tons of more cubes have now surfaced in the cube community, which has been awesome, as well as the continuation of a lot of amazing cube events, such as the Champions Cube, which just took place last week, and we'll be talking about that shortly. So we figured, hey, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in the cube space. There's plenty more to talk about. So thus brought back the idea of doing the podcast. So I am also excited. I know a lot of people have been asking for new episodes, so we are very excited to be talking about Cube. But before we get into that, anything? I mean, it's been about 3 years. I honestly, not a whole lot has changed for me. I mean, still working my job as a software engineer. I mean, I've been competing more in the Pokemon. I got my World's Invite for this year, and then I guess I moved. But you've had quite a life shift since the last time we recorded.
Yeah, I have. So I guess if it was 3 years ago, so since then I've gotten married, I've gotten a new job, moved into a house. So it's been very eventful. Yeah, I played some Pokemon too, both standard and Cube especially. But I think that's a little bit less of an event than the rest of it.
Yeah, I was watching just some of the original podcasts, and you referred to your wife as your girlfriend, and I was like, wow, that is so. It feels so old to me. Like that is such a different time in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're coming up 3 months away from our second anniversary, and so yeah, it really has been quite some time now.
That is insane. Well, as far as when we started this podcast, we were under the pandemic. Thankfully, life has changed, and now we've had a lot more, experience socially. Like we've been able to come back to events, taking, especially with IRL Cube stuff too. So maybe that's a future topic we can go into in a future episode. But life is good. We are very excited to be back here now and talking about a few new topics. So, just to give the listeners some context, we are thinking about a new episode every couple of weeks. I know last time I said this, there was a 3-year gap. So we're anticipating to have a little bit less of a stretch than that. So hopefully you can expect new episodes within the month. But enough on that. Let's get back to one of our favorite segments here, and that is our Crack a Pack. So Connor hasn't seen this pack yet. I pulled one from a Delta Mutant, which is one of the greatest cubes of all time. I figured if we're coming back, let's come back strong. I thought this pack was particularly interesting, especially in terms of how your priorities are within the first pack of the draft. So I'll be sharing that just for some context with Delta Mutant. If you're not familiar with mutant cubes basically allow you to evolve instead of it being from the same stage, the same family. It's like a Bulbasaur evolve into Ivysaur. This is all within the same type. So a Bulbasaur could evolve into a Sunflora, and that Sunflora could evolve into a Vileplume, and that sort of thing. So when we're looking at cards, we're looking at it a little bit differently than if this was a regular traditional cube. That's it. Bringing up the pack now, we have Big Malasada, a powerful item card. Allows you to heal 20 and remove status conditions, which this is a lower power cube, so the 20 damage actually is pretty relevant. We have Holland's Magnemite, which has the unique effect that you can attach it as an energy. In this case, it's a colorless. Not as cool as its older brother, Magneton, but one that you could use as a basic to evolve into a metal stage 1 or as a colorless energy. We have Pokemon Communication, powerful item card, allows you to search for a Pokemon. You just have to exchange one from your hand into your deck, so come good consistency. We have Lana's Care, which I believe just came out in this new set of Twilight Masquerade. It's basically Clara with some stipulations. It's only 3 Pokemon, and they can't be rule box. So you can put Pokemon or energy from your discard pile to your hand, but you can only pick 3. I think if I'm reading that correctly.
Well,
Yeah, a
that's how
little
I'm
bit
reading it
small.
as well.
A little bit small on my screen. Yeah, put up to 3 of any combination of Pokemon that don't have a rule box, and and basic energy from your discard pile to your hand. So a powerful recovery supporter. We have Typhlosion from Mysterious Treasures, which has that fire starter ability. It says once in your turn, you may attach a fire energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Kind of like you think about Flaffy from previous formats, that sort of ability. We have the infamous Cessation Crystal, which is a total ability lock tool card when attached to your active Pokemon. A very powerful card. And another card people are probably going to be very familiar with, Artisan, Consistency Stadium card. And then we have, probably one of the most interesting cards in this queue is Surprise Time Machine, which allows you to choose one of your evolved Pokemon, remove the highest stage, shuffle it into your deck, and then replace it with a Pokemon that evolves from that basic or evolution on top of it. So in this context of a mutant cube, if let's just say I'm evolved that Bulbasaur into a Sunflora, and then I played this card, I could replace that Sunflora with anything that could evolve from that Bulbasaur. So any like stage 1 grass. So pretty powerful trainer card as well. And then we have the Gym Challenge Brock's Ninetales, which says once in your turn you may attach an evolution card from your hand to Brock's Ninetales. Treats Brock's Ninetales if it was that Pokemon instead. It can't evolve or devolve or use Pokemon powers of that Pokemon. It says during your turn you may discard the evolution card attached to Brock's Ninetales. So this one's a little weird in this cube. So it says you may attach an evolution card from your hand. And actually, I'm not even sure what the answer is. Is it any evolution card or like stage 1s?
Yeah, so Brock's Ninetales is definitely one of the most bizarre Pokemon ever printed in the TCG. Shapeshift allows you to go into any evolution. So that can be stage 2s, it can be on type, it can be off type, it can be anything you want, with the restriction that if in this case it has a power or a body, then that is not usable once it is on top of the Ninetales, and you can discard it at any time.
I've never drafted this card in this cube, so I was not sure how that interaction worked. Okay, so very interesting ability. And then our last card is going to be Golem from Secret Wonders. It has double throw, so 2 fighting, a colorless. You choose 30 to 2 Pokemon, or you have for 3 fighting, 1 colorless, Megaton Rock. Does 80, and you can do 40 more damage. If you do, then Golem takes any damage done by Golem is reduced by 40. So basically, you'll need a way to pivot this card next turn, but you can do a lot more damage on like the turn you're attacking. So a lot of different options. We have a lot of search. We have really good search options. We have really good recovery options. Some really powerful trainer cards, as well as we have like an energy type accelerator in the Typhlosion. We have a really kooky card in the Brock's Ninetales. So Connor, how are you evaluating this pack as your pick 1 of the draft?
Yeah, so I would generally be leaning toward the Pokemon communication here. I think there are a few cards that you could go for. Communication is a really solid item-based search card, which is always incredibly valuable in any environment, mutant especially. The Typhlosion is an engine in a single card. So Firestarter allows you to attach energy. It allows you to take advantage of discard synergies, possibly something like a Roast Reveal Ninetales or Energy Draw Delcatty that could come up later in the draft. Cessation Crystal, some people really love to play this card, and it is very powerful. You can steal a lot of games, and you can build a very powerful deck if you keep your deck built around the card, considering which abilities you have access to and which you plan to use regularly. But the reason why I like communication here is because it is so, one, flexible, and two, Delta Mutant is such a well balanced cube that I don't necessarily feel the need to get into a type right away. Um, so I can kind of take the communication, let the pack go around, and kind of wait until something comes back to me. You know, if I get this golem back out of the pack, for example, then I'll know that I have a pretty clear route into fighting, and this golem is a very powerful card. And so that's a good opportunity for me. But, you know, really, when I'm looking through between picks 5 and 10 for some of those engines that might make it through later, some of the big payoffs that might make it through that an engine hasn't been opened for, those are some of the times where I'm really going to be prioritizing the stage 2, the big Pokemon option, as opposed to the consistency. A couple of exceptions. If you play a larger draft, so if you have a 10 or 12 person table, then the value of the Typhlosion goes up quite a bit, because getting into an engine with a larger table is really valuable, because you won't see packs multiple times, and decks are generally going to be less consistent. So if you have the knowledge that you already have that engine behind you right from the first pick, then that can be a big advantage. And the other one is if I know I'm at a specific type of table. So, like, if I know I'm at a table where someone's going to want to play the Cursed Stone Cessation Crystal deck, if I know that I'm at a table where somebody really loves fire and I'm going to face competition for this Typhlosion, even if I do take it pack one, pick one, that might be another consideration. It's also worth mentioning that I've never gotten to play with Lana's Care before. I do think Clara is generally the single best card in the whole cube, and so if Lana's Care is close to Clara, then I might be interested in that pack one, pick one as well.
How would you feel if that was Clara instead of Lana Scare? How would you evaluate? Would you still take PCOM, or
I would take the Clara
change your
for
mind?
sure.
You take the Clara. So Clara's that good.
Yeah, absolutely. Clara, I think is the single best card in Delta Mutant.
Is it mostly just because of the? I agree. I agree that I just find that interesting because you don't often hear discussion over Clara. And I think like it comes a lot from like his how like diverse the lines can be. I mean, getting back recovery in general in this game is very strong, but I think the ability to get back to Pokemon can really like formulate a lot of like powerful strategies. Is that where you're coming from with this?
So there are a couple of reasons why Clara is so powerful in Delta Mutant. One is that recovery is really powerful in a mutant environment to begin with. Mutant gives you more options to kind of select what your game plan is for each match, as opposed to just kind of having to evolve up into your lines and play out your strategy. With Mutant, you can kind of go in the direction that you think best suits the situation. And so being able to recover your key pieces and having a bunch of basics in stage ones that can still evolve into those key stage twos enables you to really take strong advantage of the recovery. Additionally, Mutant is tempo based, even in environments that focus on minimizing that effect as much as possible. Missing attacks is pretty much the worst thing you can do in a mutant environment. And so, if you can play cards that will lower your odds of missing an attack, then that's going to generally have a really positive impact on your win rate. Clara gives you both of those things. It gives you the recovery, it allows you to reuse your most powerful cards, and it keeps you attacking with the energy, and with you can recover an attacker and immediately swing with that again depending on what energy and engine you have on board. And so no matter what deck you are in, Clara is always incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think that's something to consider too. Is the getting the energy that you need that turn, in addition to the like immediate recovery, and then you have the energy also for next turn as well. Yeah, I think those are often things because like Clara wasn't around during like the EX era, so you didn't have a card that could do that. But like that's the cool thing about Cube, right? Is that you get to combine these like modern effects with the pacing, with in this power level of Pokemon. So I think that's really cool. I really appreciate that analysis on that card. That's something I took stuff away from that. So hopefully our listeners do too.
Definitely. Yeah, and I'll be looking out for Lana's Care. If if I was firing up a drafted Delta Mutant right now, then I might take the Lana's care just so I can give it a run and see how I feel about it.
Well, that'll do it for this Cracker Pack. If you have any thoughts, just make sure to let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear them. If you have any other opinions on any of the other cards in this cube, let us know. But as we transition to our next segment, we'll be going all into Connor's new mutant cube coming up. All right, welcome back. So, as mentioned in the intro, Connor has been working on a new cube, and you just want to talk about it. I want to let the folks know what you're working on.
Yeah, so the new cube that I have been working on is called Mutants Latent Potential. I got the idea for the name after giving essentially a PowerPoint presentation on Mutant Cube on stream a few weeks ago. And so that has really taken a lot of time and attention. And I've been thinking about the idea for the cube for months, really. And then once that opportunity for the stream came up, we were kind of eyeballing ideas and talking about what might work well. And I said, well, I don't think there's ever been a cube building stream before. So let me give it a try. Let me come on and start putting something together. And a couple weeks later, I had the first draft finished, and there's definitely a lot of detail that I can get into and that we will get into moving forward on this. But that's kind of the high level. It started off as a PowerPoint presentation, and now we have a cube from it.
It's awesome. I unfortunately had to miss that stream, but I do feel like, I mean, this is true for cube content itself, but like especially Mutant, there's not a whole lot of resources and like content dedicated to Mutant Cube, which is kind of crazy just thinking about how many Mutant Cubes do exist, especially like I feel like a lot of even like non-competitive cube players will dive into a Mutant Cube just because it's fun and it looks and it's exciting. So that it must have been a really cool like experience to have like not only a conversation about Mutant, but also a like a live building, which I think that's really cool too.
It was a lot of fun. People were pretty involved in the card selection and the presentation both. It was kind of fun because the presentation was broken up into two parts. One part is a topic that I'm really passionate about. Maybe we can talk about it on another episode, but it's how to make like a quote good cube, or what makes cubes fun and how to make them fun, as opposed to balance helps fun, but balance is not fun. And so talking about what are the components that go into a good cube, and then from there I talked about some of the additional challenges that Mutant imposes, and then we got into building the cube itself.
So then going to this cube, and is this the cube you were building on the stream?
Yeah, this is that cube.
Okay, so did you have like an idea in your mind as far as the design of like how you wanted it, the power level and like the cards included, or was this just kind of like going off cube builder like instincts, or just like things that made sense to you in a Mutant cube?
Yeah, so I knew some things going into it. I knew that I wanted it to be this mid-ish power level, lower power than Archetype Cube, which is one of my other cubes, kind of about the same level as Ultimateness. And the final draft is probably just a touch lower than Ultimateness. It's a little tough because a Mutant environment, all the cards are generally going to be at their strongest. Whereas when you play a traditional cube, you can have a stronger card that's in an environment that enables it to a lesser extent. And so how do you really line those power levels up? It can be challenging. So in terms of power level, definitely lower power than Archetype Mutant. But the reason why I wanted to build in that space is, one, because I really like the cards there. I knew that there were a lot of cards that I wanted to play that I hadn't seen in cubes, or get a real opportunity to either work together with other cards from the era or just played it all. And then there just weren't a lot of Mutant cubes in that space. I don't think that there were any, at least that I had played or was aware of, in that exact kind of power level. And so I thought that was something unique that I could do and bring to the space that hadn't been done already.
I think that's exciting. I definitely get inspired as a cube builder when I see like an opportunity to do something unique or something that hasn't been explored. So that's what I really appreciated when I saw this cube on the server, not seeing the stream that happened prior. Was like, oh, okay, this is like a different take on mutant in the sense of like the power level is slightly higher than say Delta Mutant. There's a lot of unique interactions which I found interesting. Which are things that I always love seeing when people have new cube ideas. Is that there's always something that you can take away from it, even as like a cube builder. You're like, oh, okay, I wouldn't have thought about, let's just say, mutant cube in like this way. And I noticed too, like this past couple weeks, you've had or I guess like the last week rather, you've had a lot of practice runs. It seems that there's been like a flash cube every day. It seems. How have those have been going, or how have those been influencing this cube refinement process?
Indeed, yeah. So I think it might have been the biggest run of Flash cubes that we've ever had, or at least that I've ever seen. We had 6 runs in 3 days of the cube, just in the Flash Cube channel, with lots of different participants, lots of the same participants too. Mysterious Player and Blue, especially Mysterious Player. I think Mysterious Player was there for almost every single one, but I know Blue was there for a bunch of them as well. So big credit to them for their assistance, just ironing the cube out and giving it a bunch of runs right in the beginning. But we had, I think, unique players. We had probably between 15 and 20 across the 6 runs.
Wow, that for those who aren't in the cube server, we do these things called flash cubes, and it's kind of how the name implies. They just kind of come up when people want to get cubes together. It's very casual. And normally, we'll see a cube get ran, and then it kind of varies how often. So, but it normally like one flash cube will happen like a week or even like a month sometimes it seems. Um, but to have 6 in 1 week is really, or 3 days actually rather, is very unusual but very exciting. Because you get to see a lot of development in that time, a lot of I come of it from a cube builder. It's very analytical. It's like you get a lot of research, a lot of data points to go off of after getting a lot of drafts. So, um, how did things feel at first versus how they ended? Were there any things you were expecting going into like the first draft that changed as you drafted more?
Um, I mean, my perception of the cube definitely evolved over time, and I always find, at least starting out as a cube builder with a new cube, that it's very hard for me to assess my own cube in the way that I would assess others. And I can get there eventually, but having the additional perspectives from other people around the table and the different data of the actual runs themselves really helps me kind of refine it. So in the 6 runs, a lot of work was done on pretty much every aspect of the cube. I was able to really smooth out a lot of counts and make things interesting, pack over pack. Cut out a lot of the less interesting cards, add more interesting cards, find out areas where the cube was maybe a little bit too thin or areas where it was too heavy. Turns out nowadays you can build a cube with a totally singleton trainer line that is super consistent and has a lot of high powered trainer cards. And so a lot of my early changes were just seeing if I could slim down some of the weaker trainers in that trainer line in favor of more interesting Pokemon. So a lot of changes like that. But the one big thing that I really did and was really focused on was, of course, balance. Does anything stand out as extremely powerful to the point where it's not fun to play against? Fortunately, not a lot of that. There were a couple of cards that people raised concerns about. One that I cut just because people said it was kind of swingy. It was difficult to interact with. Some decks would just kind of get blown out by it. There was another card that I think probably there's only one instance of a card that was just too strong, and I cut it because it was just too strong. It enabled plays that shouldn't be as easy as they were, which was it was Blastoise from Platinum. The double launcher attack was too much, too easy to pull together in a mutant environment, turn over turn. But the things that I changed were I really tried to make it so that there were a lot of cards in each type that made you want to play that type. So, a stage 2 where you see it and it's like, oh man, that looks really fun. Like maybe it's a fighting stage 2. You think, oh man, that looks really fun. I want to take that. I want to put that in my deck and I want to build my deck around that. And I tried to get the cube to a higher concentration of those cards and away from some of the cards where you look at and it's like, oh yeah, that'll work in my deck, but it's not really exciting for me to play. And so that was one big area that I really focused on. Another was assessing the strength of some custom cards. So I put in 9 custom cards into the cube. I wanted to see if they were behaving the way that I wanted, if people were enjoying them, things like that. Overall, I would say the custom cards were really successful, and so I was able to focus a lot of attention in other places. I didn't really have to focus on balancing those out much, and I was able to really just narrow in on the Pokemon lines and making it as fun as possible.
Yeah, I like the addition of custom cards too. I think obviously it adds a breadth of originality and like just a different, like, it's a new card essentially. So it changes how you play. Was that the original, like, when you were designing this cube, like on stream, were you thinking like, okay, maybe we'll do some custom cards, or did you get like the idea later after the stream?
So funny enough, the original idea for the custom cards came from just one place, and it was that I have always been an advocate for either removing rare candy from Mutant Cube or nerfing it so that it can only work if the player using it is behind on prizes. And the reason for that is because mutant cubes can be very swingy, and if you enable a player to play rare candy on the second or even first turn of the game, then what can happen is they can get off to an overwhelming advantage very quickly and snowball, and then players don't really get to enjoy the experience on either side. And so I really wanted to avoid that, but I didn't want to just cut candy from the cube. I wanted to enable that functionality, and so that was where the idea for the customs came from initially. But it expanded out from there quite a bit, and so I was in the custom card maker, and it allowed you to add, I don't know if it called it like a second title or a second type or something, but it basically allowed you to add a tag to the card. And so I tagged it latent potential, or I probably went through a few different iterations, but I eventually tagged it latent potential. And I thought about it, and I was like, I could put in like a whole latent potential suite of cards, and this is actually where the cube's name ended up coming from. It was like kind of a backwards way into it, but I um I ended up with quite a few latent potential cards because I wanted to add effects that I thought would be powerful and fun, but would not be viable if you put them in with no restriction. And so I went over a lot of different iterations of the latent potential rule. And what I ultimately settled on was that you can only play latent potential cards after your opponent has taken one prize. So what that does is it means you don't have to be behind to play rare candy. You just can't use it to blow your opponent out before they set up. And that's really what I wanted. I didn't want rare candy to be this card like a POW hand extension that it would just rot in your hand if you were at one prize. I wanted it to be a card that you could play at any time. And so the idea to ultimately get that rule to your opponent has to have taken one prize is something that I'm really happy with because it made the cards feel flexible. It made the cards feel powerful. It's a card that you want to take and you want to play because the restriction on playing it is not particularly tight. But you can't just take the card and immediately rare candy into a stage 2 immediately and attach an energy and swing for 60 damage or whatever and knock out your opponent's active Pokemon. So it avoided the kind of gameplay that I think Mutant can be really prone to on the less fun end of the spectrum.
I think one of the things too, when I think about Cube and especially Cube builders, is that we're essentially game designers in the sense that, like, you're taking an idea, you're thinking about like how the gameplay is going to be, whether it's deciding on your power level or how you want cards to interact. And I think this is a perfect example of, like, there's an idea that you're looking for in terms of how you want the game pacing to feel, and you want it to feel balanced and fun. So then, taking some liberties, you interject, your own cards. And I think that's a really exciting way to make Cube not only feel personal but also unique. My I remember the first time I played Delta Eevee, and like the custom cards in that cube were really fun, and it really was the first time I was exposed to like some of these like kind of homebrewed ideas, and I think that's something I wish more people would try, just because I think it encourages such fun and unique gameplay. Is there anything that you kind of see moving forward with the cube? Like, do you see any more custom cards coming into the cube, or do you think you're gonna go any other direction with it, or where's your mind at right now?
So overall, I would say that the first 6 runs were extremely successful. People overall had really positive things to say about the cube. They said they really enjoyed it. They had a good time playing it. They had a good time drafting it. The latent potential cards were a hit. Some of my evolution rules, which I changed up mutant evolution rules a bit to enable cards to go in and out of colorless and dragon, depending on the energy costs of their attacks. So those went over really well. Um, Latent potential cards. So all of latent potential cards that I had in there before are still in there. They went really well. I maybe tinkered with a count or two. I cut a couple candies and I added another DNA injection. And we don't need to get into the super specifics there, but I think there's just a lot of potential with the card type and with the mechanic because it does have that restriction. So you can put in more powerful or more interesting effects than you would generally want to put in at a card that you could play on the first turn. And so right now, I don't necessarily have any latent potential cards that think are right around the corner or anything like that. But I'm always thinking about, I have this extra opportunity, this extra potential to put in new and interesting effects that can make the cube more fun. And I think one area where the latent potential cards have a little bit of an advantage, and this is kind of a thing for custom cards overall as well. Custom cards can be really interesting in Pokemon. They can do a really good, they can enable you to use cards that you wouldn't normally use. There's all the way from making an entirely new card to like the Sharpie Cube ideology of just adjusting a couple of numbers on a card to make it more reasonable or better for your desired power level. I think both of those come from the same space. But the struggle with a custom card is making sure players will understand it and making sure they play it as intended and it doesn't add an element of difficulty to their gameplay. Just having to think about the custom card and how does it work. And I think custom Pokemon can be more difficult than trainers because trainers you already are used to. You play a trainer card, you use the effect, and then the trainer card is gone, unless it's a stadium, in which case it stays in play. But so I really focused on, for the most part, writing them like they were normal Pokemon cards, kind of with the same conventions. I referenced a bunch of different eras of like text on cards to write it in the ways that they were written. Especially now, because I think cards are generally written really concisely now. But tried to write them like Pokemon cards, and then they're all trainer cards, so people can play them. They get the effect, and then that's it. They don't have to worry about, does it have like weird new attacks or weird new effects, or does it have a power that does something that I've never seen before, and I have to think about that every single turn of the game. It's not that heavy in terms of a mental load, and so I think that also gave me a little bit of an advantage compared to cubes where either they have some or all custom Pokemon, where that can be really successful still, but it imposes more of a learning curve than just limiting it to a handful of cards and just trainers.
Yeah, and I think that plays into that whole game design element. I mean, you have to think a lot about like the context in which like people are going to be drafting the cube. You're going to have newcomers who've never, seen this cube. Maybe they've never cubed before, and it's like, how do you get those players like to understand? Okay, this is how I want this interaction to look. I think that's probably what also I mean, I'm no card designer, right? But I'm pretty sure that's something they have to think about as well. Is like, if players are going to be utilizing these cards, how are they gonna approach them? Is it easy to understand? Are we removing friction from like being able to utilize the card? I think those are really important aspects to think about for sure.
Yeah, it's always a balancing act too. You want to make an interesting effect that people have not played before because you want to make it novel and fun, but you don't want to make it so complex that it's hard to understand and hard to play. And I think we've seen great successes and some unfortunate losses at different points over the years in different cubes. But it's a space where there's a ton of room, theoretically infinite room to innovate, because once you break that rule of we have this very defined card list, which is kind of part of the premise of Cube, then you can go in any direction. You're essentially using the rules that people already know to build your own game or design your own game experience. And so, custom's really interesting. I think there's a lot of potential there, and people will continue to innovate in that space moving forward. But I'm definitely not like early to the party. I guess there have been some really impressive and successful custom cards in cubes already, from small text changes to make cards more reasonable to entire custom cubes. That all kinds of different stuff has already been done. So I'm just kind of piggybacking off of some of the successes that I've already seen around and trying to repurpose them for my uses. But to get back to the question that you had in terms of longer direction on latent potential, I think over the first 6 runs, my biggest goal was: is anything broken, and how do the evolution rules feel, and is the cube fun? And sanded off a couple of edges that I think were on the more powerful side, and really though just focused in on that fun. Once people decided that these evolution rules are really fun, and they make the cube experience unique and interesting, that really allowed me to focus on making the cube as fun as possible. And so now that I feel like there is a really nice concentration of fun Pokemon, of interesting Pokemon for people to play with, now I just want to play it a bunch of times. I just want to get more sample data. I want to see what people like, if there's anything people don't like, if there's anything that people wish existed in the cube that doesn't currently, because that wasn't really feedback that I got in the beginning. Not that I would have expected it, but I think that can always be really interesting. Once you've kind of committed to the custom card angle, then you can introduce things that people want, that your players want. And so, just kind of keeping an ear out for anything that people want to say about it, good or bad, and processing that through what do I want the cube to be and what do I want out of it, and hopefully just continuing to make as fun of an experience with it as I can.
Well, I'm excited to see where you go with it. I need to draft the cube. I haven't drafted it yet. I'm sure I'll get the opportunity to very soon, but I always look forward to seeing, especially new mutant cubes hit the I want to say hit the market, but that's not what I mean. But surface. And I want to take some time too to kind of go over some of, I guess, like, if you were listening to this podcast several years ago, and this is a little consistent still today, but I remember you were talking about Mutant was one of your least favorite formats in Cube, for the right reason. And I feel like we've there's been a lot of innovation, especially early on with Delta Mutant. I even think Rulebox Mutant employs a lot of different takes to Mutant as well, which is my cube, and then as well as we're talking about latent potential, which I thought was a very fitting name, because I see that opportunity in Mutant as well, and maybe this would be a good time to talk about some of the pitfalls in a Mutant cube if you want to share your thoughts.
Definitely. Yeah. So Delta Mutant, I would say, to your point about some of the last times we talked, Mutant was one of my least favorite experiences in Cube. I think Delta Mutant really set a new standard that kind of pioneered the Mutant Cube space and said, hey, we can do this in a way that is incredibly fun and not frustrating. And that changed my perspective on it a lot. It changed my perspective from, I think this medium of cube, or this variety of cube, is just a recipe for disaster. It has these problems that I don't see as fixable, to, oh, this can actually be an incredibly fun and rewarding experience, both for the player and for the builder, but it takes a ton of work to get there, as opposed to a more traditional cube where it doesn't take quite so much work to balance it most of the time. With Mutant, you really have to evaluate every single card, whereas in a more traditional cube, I don't have to think about every single basic that goes into my Venusaur line. I can just put in the Bulbasaurs that exist. And so that I think really redefined mutant to me. And so nowadays I still think that mutant is prone to issues, and that without a really actively dedicated lens toward those issues, you can produce a cube experience that is a lot less fun than it could be, we'll say, or a lot less fun than some of the best cubes that we see nowadays, which there are now a ton of. There's a huge list of cubes that are just a phenomenal time, absolutely exceptional to play. And so when you build a new cube, you want it to kind of stand up there with these great cubes. And starting with mutant gives you a lot of potential because you can use any card. You don't have to worry about the conventional lines, but it still does impose that these pitfalls that we're going to talk about here, and you kind of have to be conscious of that, or you can very quickly end up in an experience that is a lot less fun than it could be, or than a traditional cube would be.
Yeah, and you kind of you identified these in your latent potentials description. And what do you see as like some of the pitfalls in a mutant environment?
So I really think that there are three big things, and sometimes they play together and sometimes they don't. Number one is tempo. Mutant cubes are generally very fast compared to their non-mutant environments because they're more consistent by nature. Instead of having a 4-4-3 line and a 2-2 line and a 1-1 line in your deck, you just have a single gigantic 8-7-6 line, and all of those Pokemon evolve into each other, and so it is much more consistent, much more reliable to kind of get your game plan off the ground. But it also happens much faster as a result. And so if you're not really thinking about that as both a player and as a builder, then you can end up in situations where your opponent sets up much faster, they get a bunch more energy on board, and then they kind of create an insurmountable advantage very quickly, that you can't overcome because of how. And it's also very reliable too. Their recovery cards, suddenly anything they recover can evolve off of any existing Pokemon they have in play. Suddenly any engine accelerator can make their biggest, scariest attacker work. They don't have to dedicate a second stage 2 line to it. They can just play the stage 2 that gets the energy and then the stage 2 that uses the energy. And so, there are a lot of things at play with tempo. Another one is this is really tied in with that tempo, and it's the advantage to the player who wins the coin flip and gets to go first. This is a problem even in the best mutant cubes, and this was one of the things that I really wanted to focus on when I was building latent potential. I actually kind of invented a new starting rule to try and curb the impact of that coin flip. But in mutant, because of this tempo, the coin flip advantage really becomes overwhelming, even if you put restrictions on going first. So the player going first gets the first energy and evolves their Pokemon first. And that is really the double whammy of, I'm going to have the potential to knock my opponent's basic out on the second turn with greater reliability than any other environment. And also without having to build an aggressive deck. I can build an extremely slow deck that just has tons of huge accelerators and really focuses on the late game. But I can also happen to have a stage 1 that deals 2 for 50. And just by virtue of having that stage 1, that makes me an aggressive deck, or it gives me the potential to kind of blow my opponent out if I have the advantage of that first energy, that first evolution. And so that's another thing to consider. And then the third is centralization on monotype decks. And I think that this is the biggest area where Delta Mutant really succeeded when other cubes before it had not, and kind of redefined Mutant as an entity. And that is Mutant, especially when it's so tempo focused, it really wants you to be in one type. You want to play the one type. You want to make as big of a line in that type as possible. You want to get all those synergies, and then you want to play that. And what Delta Mutant did is it said, okay, well, we're gonna build the cube in this in this era of the game where Pokemon are multiple types pretty often, especially dark and metal. And so by doing that, suddenly your basic dark, or we'll say even farther out, your basic water Pokemon can evolve into a water and metal Pokemon. And now that water and metal Pokemon can evolve into a water stage 2. You can stay in your type. It can evolve into a metal stage 2. So you got that second type. Or it can evolve into any other stage 2 that has metal as one of its 2 types. So you can evolve into Delta Metagross. You can evolve into Delta Gardevoir or Flygon. And suddenly you've expanded the number of options available for deck building and gameplay dramatically from what it would be if you didn't have those multi-type Pokemon. And so when you kind of break out of that monotype formula that Mutant so often rewards, you create this incredible array of options and gameplay permutations that don't exist in any other environment. So I guess that's that kind of identifies an issue and talks about one of the reasons why it's bad and what other cubes are doing to get around that. But if you just stay in one type and you build toward that one type and you sit down from an opponent who you either hit for weakness or your opponent hits you for weakness, then suddenly you have a non-game on your hands. It's probably going to be over very quickly. It's not going to be very interactive, and you just kind of sit there and say, okay, well, I spent, let's say, an hour and a half drafting and building, and then I've spent another 20 minutes. So let's say you've spent about 2 hours now after the end of your first match, and you haven't had any fun yet because either you got blown out because of weakness or your opponent got blown out because of weakness. And it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel rewarding. But if you try and diversify and build a multi-type deck in a normal mutant cube without kind of consideration for these multi-typing, then it can mean that if you don't hit that weakness matchup, then suddenly you are at a disadvantage. Your deck is less consistent, it is less streamlined, less focused, and less effective against all the rest of the decks at the table.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from, especially depending on the power level too. I mean, I think when you're playing a mutant cube and you're getting punished for diversifying types, some of that is like the high power theory, where it's like if I'm dedicating time for weakness mitigation, I'm playing less consistency, which gives me a worse matchup against like the overall whole of decks that are going to be more consistent, as opposed to like hitting the type advantage. And I think especially in like well balanced like lower power, it is much more rewarding and advantageous to diversify your types. And I think I know for me, like that was a huge level up moment when I was as a player getting into the benefits of exploring mixed typing. And Delta Mutant lends itself pretty well to it too. I identified with like the ability to utilize the Delta traits, the mixed typing and deltas. But I think like players often don't think about how their deck handles weakness as much as they should when they start out. Because I think we get tunnel visioned in the beginning of, okay, I drafted the Typhlosion, if you remember, for the crack effect later. So I am in fire. So I'm going to build a fire deck, which is a good start. And then I think where it starts to get exciting is when you think about, okay, Typhlosion pairs really well with fire cards, but what else does it pair really well with? Oh, okay, I have Salamence EX. That takes fire energy and water energy. Well, what can I pair with from water? And then I think you start to see like the real complexity and fun of building a mutant deck is that you can cross types in a really interesting way. And I think a lot of cubes kind of pigeonhole you into a certain type, and that can be challenging. So I think like definitely the type centralization is something I see a lot. And I know when I was working on Rulebox Mutant, that was something that I think we even had conversations about. It's like, okay, how do you get, what encourages you to go into different types, and what makes you more like, I guess, what feels less bad about, diversifying your type layout, because sometimes it does feel bad, or sometimes it feels like you're better off just playing one type. And how are you approaching that in your own cube, or like, how do you identify that in the way you constructed it?
Yeah, so I have a whole special set of rules to enable this, or to kind of enable people to break out of a single type. And that is that Pokemon can evolve from and into all of the types on their energy attack costs. So this this gets really interesting because there are throughout Pokemon's history two types that traditionally have a ton of different colored energy in their attack costs, even on the same card. And those are Dragon and Colorless. And so in the Dragon and Colorless lines, so Dragon in Latent Potential is actually not a type with its own identity at all. There are only a few line toppers, and really the whole goal is for Dragon to be this glue that bridges gaps between different decks and types and strategies. And so that's kind of Dragon's place. And then Colorless, both at the basic level and then at the stage 1 level, also has a lot of these kind of glue cards that allow you to both get into Colorless and also get into other types, either from another type or from Colorless. And so the combination of those, in addition to, the cube still is in a great power level for a lot of the stronger Delta cards, for a lot of the stronger Dark Pokemon. And so using some of those Deltas, some of those Darks, and then some of the less powerful Dragons, and then a lot of different colorless Pokemon from across the game's history, you end up, at least in Latent Potential, with a ton of different ways that you can build a deck and a ton of different directions that you can move from almost anywhere.
No, I can appreciate that. I think like that's a really interesting way to approach it. And I think like I like that idea. I always like that in Delta Mutant, where like you have these dual type Pokemon that allow you to like diversify your deck, just because you have so many more options. Like the fact that I could evolve into like a grass metal stage 1, and then I have access to Delta Flygon. Like I think stuff like that's fun, because like nothing feels worse than like crafting a deck and like you can't really express your deck building. You have to like kind of just like gridlock yourself into like one archetype. But I think allowing multi-types lets you have like a really like dynamic deck, or a really deck that like can do a lot of different things, which is really, really fun as a player.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas where Mutant can really become this unique thing that no other type of cube can be, when you can build these really intricate decks and strategies that pull on lots of different cards from all over Pokemon's history, and ultimately come together to create a single goal or a set of goals that that will allow you to play the game your way and win the game, hopefully, your way.
Well, I kind of related to that, So it's 2024, and we've seen a bunch of different mutant cubes throughout the years, and hopefully more along the way. What is kind of your thoughts on like the state of where mutant is at? I think your opinion has shifted since the first time we've talked about mutant. And where do you see it now?
It is interesting. It's in an interesting place. It has the lows that existed in Mutant before, that maybe not like the format, still exist. And they're very hard to break away from, even if you're intentionally trying to do so. And so that part of my opinion hasn't really changed, but we now have seen this set of highs. And the two cubes that I really point to when I talk about the highs of Mutant are Delta Mutant, which we talked about extensively, and your Rulebox Mutant cube, which just is totally unique from any other cube. And those really changed my perspective on Mutant Cube and what it can be versus what it often is. And so that's I would say Mutant. I had a slide, or even a whole section in my presentation a couple weeks back, and it was just titled "Mutant is terrible," in parentheses, and also amazing. And I think that that's kind of my opinion now, as opposed to all terrible.
Well, maybe in another 3 years it'll be slightly better. As time goes on.
We will see. I think too that right now, because of the perception of mutant over the years, because I think a lot of players have known about mutants problems for a while. Maybe they just weren't broken down in the same way that we've seen different things like power level broken down, and so they haven't really built a ton of them. There are a few mutant cubes that have been built over the last couple of years that are pretty solid. Um, there's like a mid high power mutant cube that Sebastian built that's pretty cool. Davi built a low power cube that I never got to play, but I was really excited to play it. Um, but I don't think he's worked on it for a little bit. But in general, there's still a lot to explore. There are not a ton of mutant cubes that have been built by either the established fantastic cube builders or newer cube builders who have a really active eye toward wanting to make as good of an experience as possible. Because you don't have to be a fantastic cube builder to get started. You can be a brand new cube builder who just wants to get better and learn and try and make a fun experience, because that's all the great cube builders started there at some point. And so we could see a totally new entry. I actually reviewed a cube on stream a couple of days ago, and it was a high power mutant cube, which is something that I've expressed uncertainty and concern about in the past. But I saw a lot of potential in that cube that I hadn't seen in the space before. And that builder is, really active and engaged with the balance and wants to make as fun of an experience as possible. And so I could see, potential from that builder to turn that cube into another experience that really furthers the growth of mutant. But I think ultimately, it right now mutant is very unexplored, very underdeveloped.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this, get out there, get a mutant cube on there right now. So I think there is a lot of I really like the name latent potential on your cube, because I feel like it is a really accurate description of where mutant sits. I do think, oddly enough, after all of these years, it is very underexplored. But I think as time goes on and people start to dabble in mutant, I feel like we will start to see a lot more innovation. We saw a huge spike, obviously, when Delta Mutant first arrived, and then it's kind of flatlined. And there have been really great cubes since. But I think it'll be exciting to see how and when other players start to pick up this archetype of cube, and where players can take it. All it takes is one person to have a breakthrough, and then suddenly you start seeing more ideas. So I think it's just a matter of time until we start seeing, a significant growth in the mutant cube space.
Yeah, and my hope is that both with this podcast, with the presentation that I gave, that I'm gonna turn into a video because we hit a stretch goal on the Champs prize pool, and also with latent potential, that I can kind of start the first steps toward the next wave of great cubes, and in this time in the mutant space, we've seen a bunch of different waves of cube, and different areas where people have really gotten into and found a lot of incredible fun experiences out of, and I think one of the spaces that is still the least explored is mutant. And so my hope is that through all these different resources and efforts, that that more people will be motivated to build a mutant cube and kind of expand upon the space.
Well, if you're listening to this and you have any topics you want us to cover on this podcast about Mutant Cube, just let us know in the comments. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with a brief recap on Champions Cube. See you soon. All right, welcome back. So, as we talked to in the intro of this podcast, is that the Champions Cube event took place not too long ago. It was a very fun event, a little bit different from at least my perspective, because I wasn't as involved in the streaming of it. But for those that aren't aware of what Champions Cube is, it is the most competitive cube event of the server. Basically, you earn points through Cube League, and those points get you into the Champions Cube tournaments, which is like a invitational, and then it takes place over the weekend, 2-day tournaments, and then eventually we narrow it down to a winner, and we offer cash prizes, and it's always a fun thing to watch, especially as a spectator, to see how these really outstanding cube players compete amongst each other in a very short time frame. So I had a lot of time watching it. Connor, the three-peat champion, is still here. How did you feel about the event overall?
Yeah, spoilers, I guess, for later in the discussion. But yeah, I from day one, I was coming from the perspective of a commentator and a staff member because Davi had put together this great commentary setup, and but we were light on staff, and so I was happy to step in and help run that element of it. And then originally I was just scheduled to commentate the draft, but we had a couple of things change around and some availability shift, and I was able to cast a few rounds in the end. And so that was a really interesting perspective. It was a great time. I really enjoyed it, but I think we're kind of coming from all angles this time because day two, then I was once again a competitor, just like I've been in years past.
Yep, and then I was spectating the event this time. Didn't have enough time to really dedicate to working the event, but was able to tune in throughout the weekend, which was cool. I don't often get to just spectate these type of things, and I am definitely major props to Davi DeSosa, not only the server owner but also managing the stream. He did a phenomenal job. A shout out to all the casters, Joe Bernard, Omnipoke, and Victor Ong, as well as Connor as well. You guys I all did a great job. I had a great time listening to all the matches, and I thought the insights were particularly, it's very helpful, and especially as a viewer trying to, watch the game. I thought they added a lot of value, which commentary doesn't always have that. But I felt like the commentators in this Champions Cube was very strong, so I definitely appreciated that. How did it feel swapping from like a sort of like a admin slash like a commentator to like a competitor, and then like the next day? How did that feel?
It was an interesting transition because in the lead up, I was really focused on, oh, we've got to focus on the production, and I got to check with Davi to make sure he's got staff and judging, and let's make sure I talked with him some about like format and how to approach rounds, and I didn't talk to him too much about that aspect, but you know, and like how can I make my commentary as entertaining as possible? And let's look over the cube list and make sure I really have it up to date, and um, all these different things, that I was thinking about going into day one as like a commentator and as a staff member. And then as soon as that first day of play ended, as soon as that last round ended, and I was no longer judging, it was a total flip to, okay, what is my approach to going to be tomorrow? Like what is my strategy going to be for the draft? What are things that I'm going to be looking out for? How do I think I'm going to be able to succeed in my matches? And just a totally different train of thought from what I had in the lead up.
Yeah, I can't imagine, because it's like a complete like mentality shift of what things you're thinking about, and like I will definitely get to your run in a second. I did want to take a second just because it was my cube up on the day one. We For those who aren't familiar with the format, basically for this event, um we had a day one cube and then a day two cube. So those who didn't earn an auto invite to day two competed for essentially getting into top eight. And I think there were 4 spots available into day two. So we drafted my cube, the Rulebox Mutant cube, on day one, and then we drafted Best Ball House Coin Flip cube in day two. But I was surprised to see Rulebox Mutant actually get voted into one of the cubes used for this tournament, because how it works, it's all very community driven. So we do a poll. We poll the participants or people who have qualified, and they get to vote. I think we still do a weighted draft, or not weighted draft. What's it called? Second choice poll or whatever, where you pick your top three, and then like each one gets assigned a value. Like first place is like 3 points, second place is like 2 points. It's basically like all kind of aggregates out to like the top picks. You're not just putting on one cube. You're kind of just putting forth which ones you are the most wanting to draft, I guess.
And
am I explaining that right?
this time it was you would go through all the cubes for the season and rank them 1 to 5, and
Oh,
then
okay.
and then they weren't like in order. A 5 was the best. You could have as many 5s as you wanted. A 1 was the worst. You could have as many, or a 0, or the exact
Oh, it's
top and
different.
bottom. I'm not
Okay.
sure. I know they've done that in years past. Maybe the last one or two times that it's been done. I know. I was happy to see these cubes up there because I voted for them, or I mean, I gave them high ratings, and so I was excited to see these. I said this on the commentary, but I thought that this was was probably the best lineup of cubes that we had for champs, just from day one to day two, because I thought they were really distinct from a player and spectator experience side. Really testing the range of your abilities as a drafter, and giving a really interesting view on what Pokemon Cube can be. The drastically far ends of it, from a spectator point of view. But also they're just both really fun. They're very interesting. They're a great time to play. They're strategically complex, and so yeah, I was really happy to see these couple of cubes come up on top.
Yeah, I was I was still surprised with Roblox, because I feel like the issue Roblox has is just the absurdity of the cube, and it's very non-traditional in the way that it looks. I mean, it's all Roblox cards. It tends to get like classified as a meme, which, to be fair, in its inception, it definitely was. Just a wacky idea. But I think over time, and especially in the past 6 months, I've spent a lot of time refining it and getting it to a point where it's a legitimate cute fun cube experience. But I don't expect people to necessarily, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like I don't expect people to get that. I expect people to, if people write it off, they write it off. It is what it is. So I was very honored to have it out there as the day one cube. Getting to see it drafted and played um was a really cool sight to see, especially other people experiencing the cube for the first time. As the cube builder, I love watching that, and I love seeing how people react to just like the different ways you can build decks, and watching Zach's draft with the drafting the dragons was really cool. But this was a really cool experience. I was really happy to see Roblox Mutant out there as the day one cube.
I think it well. So in terms of the perception of the cube, I think people have really over the last few months began to understand the fun of the value and the skill, and that it's not, it looks very silly, I guess, at a glance, just because it's these huge, big, powerful, yeah, EX GXV Pokemon that people associate with a very high tempo, oftentimes not the best period of the game's history. But then the cube itself ends up not feeling like that at all. It ends up being completely different as a play experience. And it's very strategically complex. The draft is very deep. There are a lot of different strategies. It's not like super fast. I mean, it really plays like a mid power cube in terms of the speed of games. And so I think a lot of people now really see what the cube has done, and how unique and fun it is.
Yeah, and that's what I love to see. I know a lot of time was kind of put into it, kind of trying to achieve um that more mid power like tempo, because I think like that's what makes cube fun, is having more turns and having, especially like utilizing these cards in a way that they weren't originally used in. And I'm glad to see that too. Um, if you're going to any events that I'm going to as far as regionals go, let me know. I have this cube built out in person. So It is one thing to draft it online, but to draft it in person is a whole nother experience. But enough about that. I really want to get into your day two run. So, did you do much prep beforehand going into this cube, or were you kind of just going off of instincts in terms of like draft strategy or research in the cube? What was your prep like for this event?
I did a ton of prep this time. I was kind of a maniac. Like my wife and I went out to dinner the day before, and I told her, it was after casting day one, and we went out to dinner, and I was like, I just cannot stop thinking about this cube. Like, I cannot stop thinking about the draft tomorrow. I was really motivated to win, or at least to do as well as I could, and so yeah, I did a lot of prep this time, and my prep was really focused on the draft, um, and what decks I thought were powerful, what decks I thought could succeed, and how I wanted to approach the draft related to that, because coin flip is a very interesting environment. You have these consistency cards that are far more powerful than anything that exists normally in the TCG. And then you also have this very high tempo kind of environment where having a very powerful Pokemon at the right time can be a crucial point in the game. And I think that over time, the balance on coin flip has really improved and gotten to a good place. But I think there are still a couple of areas of the cube and a couple of lines that are not quite up to the level of the others. Now I don't really feel like there's a standout best strategy like I have it at some points in the past. I think there are a lot of very strong strategies, but I do think that there are a handful of lines that I would play on a regular run of the cube if I was just sitting down with people, because I would want to try it out and I think it'd be a good time. But in terms of trying to give myself the highest odds of winning the cube, I was not interested in a couple of the lines. And so I went through and I totaled up the number of decks. And notably it was decks. It was not lines, because in coin flip, there are a lot of lines that kind of span, or a lot of strategies that kind of span multiple lines, like spread. That's one that spans like 3 or 4 different lines. And so um, I kind of totaled up the number of decks that I thought could win, like win the event, not just succeed, but like win the whole thing. And my final count was like 7.5, because there was one that I wasn't totally sure about. And so, based on that, I said, okay, well, everybody at this table is going to know what the good cards in this cube are. It's not as though I'm going to get past a ton of crazy stuff because people are inexperienced and they don't understand the cube, and that's just not going to happen because it's day two champs. Like, everybody who's here is really skilled, and so I knew, because there were only like 7.5 decks that I really thought could win the event, that I was going to have to really prioritize Pokemon in the draft. I knew I was going to have to go really aggressively for the powerful attackers and engines, because if I didn't, they would not come back. And I would end up with a deck that was very consistent, but not actually able to win games because it didn't have a strategy that was powerful enough to actually do that. And so I would say my prep all said. I mean, if we talk about like thinking kind of the whole night about it, and really just almost obsessing over it for that period of time, I prepped probably 6-7 hours. But if we talk about actual time that I just kind of stared at the list and I really broke it down, almost kind of mathematically how I wanted to approach it, I probably spent like 2-3 hours deciding how I wanted to go about the draft and what decks I kind of wanted to end up in out of the different strategies within the cube.
So then would you say like this is like the norm for you in champs, or is this more prep than what you've normally done, especially compared to your other two wins in champs?
I think it varies. So in champs 1 and 2, I over prepped. I over prepped pretty bad. I mean, there were outside stressors going on in champs 1 and 2. Trying to wear too many hats at the same time and still play and all that. But the I think I really champs one. I made an extensive spreadsheet with all of the different decks that I thought could win. And even like tiered them out relative to each other. And ultimately, the deck that won was a deck that I put in like the A tier or whatever, not the S tier. And I was like, oh man, I could have built an S tier deck or whatever. But I think that was too much. It made me think about it too far out of context of what an actual draft is like. It's things are never going to go perfectly right in a draft with players that are extremely skilled. And so I think that was a big issue, a big flaw. I was thinking too rigidly based on my prep. And then in the second champs, I basically looked at the stuff and I said, I think there's this archetype that nobody's ever drafted before that's absolutely insane, and we could try that. And it was like me and Mike and somebody else I think we were talking to, maybe Zach. Um, and we went in, and I was definitely too focused on that deck. And I ended up with a version of it that was not very good. It was not very consistent and just not built that well. But Mike took that archetype and he won. He won the cube. So there was some value to that. But I think it was really Delta Mutant where and then Champs 3 I didn't prep enough. I did not spend nearly enough time prepping for that. But Champs 4 was really where I think I got my modern prep routine. I hesitate to call it a routine, but my modern prep practices in place, where I kind of said, okay, I think Delta Mutant has all these strong decks, but I think all of the decks in Delta Mutant are good. And so if I just let the draft tell me what to do, then I will be able to build a deck that can win. And that was what happened. And so when we look at cubes further down, I was focused on a combination of what do I think the best decks are, and then do I think I can just kind of approach this in a way that I can wait and I can see what's happening, or do I have to make really hands-on aggressive plays in the draft to kind of cement a deck against a field of people who will also be trying to do a similar thing. And depending on the run, it's been a different answer to that question. But this time around, I think I did as good of a job as I've ever done with deciding exactly how I wanted to approach the draft. And I mean, I ended up with a really weird deck, and even out of the draft, I wasn't totally sure whether it was good or not, because it was unique in some ways, and it merged a couple of strategies that didn't generally go together, and it was using some synergies that I had never really seen used before. Like I played like 5 or 6 basics that had a coming into play power, and then like a swoop and a Fuji and Skyfield, and just tried to reuse those cards a ton of times. And I had not really seen anyone do that, at least in coin flip before. But I think it's generally kind of a lesser explored way to build decks. And so it was a weird deck in the end, but I think the success. One, I think I played pretty well across all 3 matches, but 2, I think the preparation for the draft and knowing what I needed to do going in were instrumental to my ability to come out on top in the end.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting perspective, because like it's one thing to think about like let's just say like a Pokemon regional and like how that prep looks, but like going to a draft is completely unknown, like what you're going to be drafting. I mean, so it's so interesting to see like how you're approaching not only like the draft, but also like like evaluating like the card pool. I think like that's something that maybe that could be even a topic in the future. But I really think that that's something that you don't really often see, just because like regular Pokemon prep feels a bit different, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. When you're playing standard, you're trying to find these marginal advantages. You and your opponent are always, or basically always, going in with a very powerful deck. And so you're trying to find these marginal advantages, these play patterns that give you extra percentage points and make sure your play is refined as possible. And you're going to be going in with exactly the strategy that you're going in with. And cube, it's totally different. It's like you don't even know what strategy you're going to be in by the end of the draft when you're in that very first pick. And so yeah, it kind of forces you into a sort of mental flexibility that I think is really fun, but it is certainly completely different from what you get playing the game in standard, even very well.
Well, are there any other thoughts, any final thoughts you have over this season of Champs?
I thought that I thought the event was run fantastically. You know, I thought Dobby did a fantastic job. The stream team, I watched back some of the footage, and it was really great as a spectator, even after the fact. So this champ, and you know, to some extent, this season didn't go the best for me, and so I to win again was really a validation that I can still push to try to be the best, you know, as much as there can be a best in a format where there's no official events or whatever, but the closest thing we have to the best, um that is something that I really want to strive for as long as I can.
Well, I think you're doing a good job keeping it that way. But it's always exciting to see like where other people take it to, because this is like one of the most competitive events, and I love seeing how people come out to this and they really give it their all. So if you missed any of this event and want to watch, there are VODs on YouTube. We'll link those in the description. I highly recommend giving it a watch. Like we said, the stream team did a great job. The gameplay is rich and very very high level. And these two cubes definitely showcase like what we're talking about here. And I definitely recommend, if you haven't checked out James Cube, definitely give it a watch. If you're into cube content, which if you made it this far in the podcast, I have a safe bet that you probably would be interested. But yeah, I think that'll do it for this section. Don't go away. We're gonna be back with our final section coming very soon. See you there. All right, welcome back for our closing segment. It's been interesting to see how I think life has kind of changed over since the podcast started to where it is now, especially in like the competitive Pokemon sense. I didn't even think about bringing this up on the podcast, but you literally got second at a regional since we've had an episode. I think that's crazy.
Oh yeah, that's pretty nuts to think about. I at the very beginning of the episode, I wondered if that was something that had happened since the last time we had talked, but I didn't remember, so I didn't bring it up. But yeah, I did. It was a great time. It was a great run. And you know, I had a great time playing competitive Pokemon for a while in the time since we last recorded an episode. And you've been very competitive this season, especially.
Yeah, it was definitely grinding for the invite this year, which thankfully got there. It's definitely been a little challenging with just like now it's like working the full-time job as opposed to like back like pre-COVID when I was in college. I felt like it was easier to like just dedicate, tons and tons of hours to like regional prep. For now it's like, okay, I need to work my 40 and after that, find time. Which I think everyone struggles with this. Like I'm not unique in that aspect, but it definitely changes like how I approach events. So I'm still figuring it out. But I'm looking forward to being in Hawaii coming this August.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm super excited for you. I'm really glad that you were able to make it to the end and get the world's invite. Um, Definitely agreed on the time issues. I would say that even more than the cost
Yeah.
is a huge limiter for at least my ability to participate in Pokemon events, because you know, even if you can get to London, let's say, or Brazil and spend basically a whole week there, um, you you have to do that around, at least in my case, you know, I have to do it around a full-time job. I have to do it around being married, um and so it's a tremendous pressure on an already limited pool of time, I would say, to really be super competitive at it.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely gained a lot of respect for like I've met a lot of players who um I just know they just work super hard. Like they have they this is their free time. And I definitely respect players that have. I mean, I respect a lot of players, but I also respect the people who have that hustle, that have that not only have that work their full time, but also spend a lot of their free time outside of this playing Pokemon. Like I definitely can see the sacrifice that takes on for people. I think that's super admirable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to play the game at the highest level you can, or the highest level that it can be played at, even, um, and to have a full time job and other commitments at the same time is, it's a real test of dedication, and the people who can do it are very impressive.
So something I wanted to talk about on here, just because it's still kind of fresh news, and kind of want to get your perspective on it since you've been playing the game for a long time. Um, they recently announced a change to. Oh, they announced a lot of new changes, but one of them was being like the going back to a top X structure. For those who don't know, that the Pokemon World Championships you could qualify before by kind of crossing a point threshold by going to events. Now it's going to be the top 125 in North America, and then it's broken out in other regions too. Um, how do you feel about that change in structure? And have you? I don't remember. Was it like that before while you were playing?
So yeah, I played when it was top X, and there are significant differences between the two different formats. However, I think the announcement and the changes are significant in a lot of ways, and unfortunately, I think a lot of wins were really buried by a couple of kind of baffling mistakes. Um, One of those, of course, I think people have talked this to death, and I don't really have that much to add. But I think the regional allocation in terms of world spots is pretty disbalanced. I think a top X structure is generally to the benefit of the people who can attend a ton of events, and so in that aspect, I'm never going to be the target audience for a top X, so it sucks for me. But it it has a benefit of Pokemon knowing exactly how large their event can get. And from an organizer's perspective, that allows them to do a lot of things that they wouldn't be able to do in a point like cutoff structure. So, toward the end of this season, they can have models and projections and all that, but there's no way they could ever really know exactly how many players they were going to have in day one of Worlds. And a top X structure does have the advantage of solidifying that. And so it doesn't appeal to me. I'm not the target audience for that kind of change, but it does have advantages that I would be unfair not to draw attention to. But I think another, at least for me, another disappointing thing in tandem with that top X structure was internationals being still tremendously over the average, or over the point payout of a regional. And so now, even if you perform incredibly well at many regionals, if you didn't go to any internationals, either you weren't able to or you didn't make registration, then it can be very difficult to make that top 125 for, at least for North America. Um, with and I think that it also is not accurately reflective of the relative difficulty of those events. I think the only way you could really justify that super high increased payout for internationals is if, we'll say it's roughly twice the payout of a regional. Um, if an international was twice as large as a regional, then I think that you could justify that. But thus far, what we've seen from venue caps is that that's not true at all. The internationals are generally not any larger than a regional championship, and so it feels very bad to either miss registration or not have the resources or the time to take a ton of time and money to travel to these international destinations just for the goal of getting more points. And so I think that was unless we see Pokemon really open up the international registrations, maybe they reserve twice as much venue space as they did before, and they actually expect that they can get 7,000 players for an international, just to throw a number out there. Or yeah. Um, Unless they expect to do that, then I think that it was a miss. But if they actually did go through and expand the attendance caps for internationals drastically, then I think it could potentially be a very strong season structure, with the exception that, of course, the regions are a really difficult issue to overlook.
Yeah, I share the similar thoughts. I thing I don't like about Pokemon structure is that the internationals are like the most important events that like you're like really incentivized to go to them, and that's fine. I don't have any issue with that. But like the fact that they get capped so like quickly, and that you expect players to go to these events, but a lot of them are are unable just because there's just not enough venue size, or not enough seats. It just feels bad. Like it feels bad to grind really hard, and then let's just say you're not able to get into like NAIC at the very end of the season. I mean, that's just like a rough like way to go. And I know like several people weren't able to finish out their invite this year just from not getting into the tournament. But imagine being at like 130 or 124, and you're like you can't get into the end of the tournament. You're cooked. They're done at that point. Um, so I did see the ICs are in the same venues they were in the previous year. I know they're all pretty big convention centers, so I'm hoping. Well, I don't know. I'm hoping that they did allocate more space, but we'll see how those contracts worked out. But I do think that the BFL combining with the ICs is a positive change. I was happy to see that, because before it felt like, I mean, point structure is going to feel obviously different because you're just trying to get to a certain line. But the fact that you could just go to 3 ICs and then, but I don't know. I guess like saying that, like, I don't mind it if people can do it, if that's on them, I don't, a lot of people get mad about that stuff. And it's like, I don't, if someone wants to go to like all the ICs, I mean, I went to all 3 ICs this year. It doesn't disappoint me if they qualify, but I think for like this like, or you're trying to get into like a top X spot, like rewarding someone for going to all 3 ICs and then going to like 6 SPs just doesn't seem like the idea or the spirit of what they're trying to do. So I was happy to see that those kind of got consolidated together.
Yeah, I think that was definitely one of the, I would say, quite a few positive changes out of this announcement. Was the consolidation of those BFLs? Just because, in addition to that, it means that players who can travel to international championships more than others don't just have this extra gigantic bank of points to pull on, compared to somebody who can only travel to regionals within their own country or within their own region. Um, so I do think that is a positive change, but I think the the disparity in international point payouts is significantly, or the impact of it is really intensified when you make it a top X system as opposed to a benchmark system, because suddenly everybody has to have the same attitude as somebody who was just chasing top 16 before.
Yeah, I hope that it's in the long run good for the game, but I can definitely see the challenges players can have in a system like that. Thinking about burnout and like how those can sometimes get players to um not enjoy the grind as much as just having a designated point goal. Sometimes the stress of, oh, am I going to get bumped out or that sort of thing. I'm hoping that this is a positive experience overall, but yeah, I definitely can see some challenges.
Yeah, I have, as a player who may attend a couple of regionals in the upcoming year, and probably not a lot beyond that. Um, there are some changes that I'm excited for, expanded pack payouts. I know it's not significant in terms of value, but it's nice to at least receive something. And The change to the number of rounds in each day, I think, was really good. At least from my perspective, I know people are I think I saw some feedback that people were concerned, oh, now it's harder to make day two because you got to go X2 and ties are really bad. And, if you were trying to win the event, ties were already disastrously bad. There's nothing really different there. It's just you take them at a different time now and they mean something at a different time than they did before. But really, if you were going in at the very bottom point cutoff before, you would essentially have to win every single match to make it into top eight. And it did happen. I was a player who went into day two at 6-2-1 and made top eight. I think I went 4-0-1 because it was slightly smaller, and that was still on the bubble, which is crazy, but I think the change to a more rigid or a stricter day two advancement criteria is not necessarily a negative one. On the flip side, the improvement to fatigue and the overall number of rounds that have to be played was a big one, because for these 16 or 15 round events, it was just insane. Absolutely. I mean, at least for someone who is like almost 30 now, I definitely don't have the ability to like not sleep and just go and play Pokemon for 10 hours and not even think about it. Or it's really even more than that, I guess. But um, and just get up and do it again the next day. Playing 9 rounds. By the time I even walk into day two, I'm already exhausted. And so the attention to fatigue and player fatigue, I really appreciated personally, at least.
Yeah, I think that'll make a huge difference. And also, it's so grueling, especially if you are going at and it's 6-2-1 in the old system, and then like your first few rounds don't go well, and then like you basically have to play 3 more rounds to get 128. Like that is so it just doesn't feel good, and I'm glad that they have cut down the number of rounds for that reason. Also, a unique challenge this year for me at least was like every time I was in day two, I was like 1,000 miles from home. So I'm like, wow, I really need to catch this flight. So I would really like to not end at like 3 o'clock and then have to get to the airport by 4. So I think in terms of travel logistics, it's also a little bit nicer. Um, the 8 rounds day one is gonna be interesting for some of the smaller events. I think like once you get to like the 9 rounds, you need the 7-2. I think it's still gonna feel like about the same. I think like players will probably just tying got worse for one, and then also players just won't ID that last round. Which in the long run would probably give players a better opportunity to win the event anyway. So I think it'll be fine, but I'll be interested to guinea pig that at World and see if I have the same opinion.
Yeah, it's one thing to look at it from this far out, but it's another thing to actually play in that environment. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. I think yeah, playing 9 rounds day one into I still do think the round reduction day two is nice, at least, even if you do
Yeah.
have a 9 round day one. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm very excited for the 8 round day ones.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hoping that helps like the tournament staff too, not feel so like they spend like hours in that venue, and it's crazy. So I'm hoping it's a positive change for them as well.
Yeah, anything that benefits tournament staff, I'm strongly in favor of. They have very difficult and often thankless jobs, and so anything that benefits them on a large scale, I'm always really happy to see.
Well, we've talked a lot about Pokemon itself. Anything else going on in your life that you want to share?
Oh goodness. Well, if we talk about right now, it's a little bit of a different question compared to the 2-3 years since we last released an episode. Um, I've done lots of stuff. I've gotten really into bowling, both as just as a an activity that I enjoy, and also as a fitness activity. Because when you bowl with a group of 5 or 6, it's not really a huge fitness activity. You still get some activity, but when you bowl alone, which is generally what I do, you can really exert yourself. I guess is a good way to say it. So, yeah, I've gotten really into that. I'm not able to play a ton of competitive Pokemon right now, just for specifically the time constraints that we've talked about, and the still playing a lot of Cube, still really excited and passionate for it. So not much change there. I think I'm probably more excited now for it than I have been in the last couple of years, because now I don't have the additional weight of having to run the group for that many people and worry about that so much. Even though I do, of course, talk to the admins and advise anytime they need anything like that. But um, yeah, the Steam Summer Sale, I spent most of my champs winnings on games on the summer sale, so I'm excited to play a bunch of those. How about you?
I mean, so just kind of getting moved into the new home. I've been trying to open this pool for a couple weeks now. The previous owners did not tell me that there was going to be no filter uh or filter tabs, which were important to know. So I'm learning a lot as I go through and begin to figure out what is not there but should be there. So aside from being a pool babysitter, been doing the marching band gig again. For those who don't know, I teach front ensemble part time. I'm a full time software developer, but I was very active in music growing up, and I enjoy teaching high schoolers how to play and hit things with sticks. So that's going really well. Definitely takes up a lot of my time. Although it's weird the more I think about this, because as the Pokemon season ends, the Marching Man season kicks in. This Pokemon's pretty it's not a whole lot of events that go on over the summer other than Worlds. But that's when like most of the work happens for Marching Man. So like I'm in like rehearsals, you know, 4 days a week, on and off weeks. And then they'll have like band camp for 2 weeks. And then like the second band camp is done. And that is like honestly the majority of the work is done at that point. I catch a flight to go to Worlds. So it's like perfectly like tailored end of like how each activity works this year, which is weird how it all fits together, but I'm not gonna complain. I'm it's very convenient.
Convenient, and also, potentially, at least to me, it sounds kind of stressful from a
Oh,
scheduling perspective.
yeah. I mean, it can be. Luckily, like how our system works at the high school I teach at is like the previous week we had like 4 days worth of rehearsals, and then this week it's like nothing. There's like no rehearsals this week. And then we'll do the same thing next week. So it's kind of like an on and off kind of thing. Um, and then once the summer is done, like the workload goes significantly down, because then you're looking like at twice a week commitment for like a couple hours. So it's like really intense over the summer, but there's no Pokemon there. So there's like, I'm not really juggling the two. Just kind of work life balance in my own job. But I'm thankful the two don't really like mix, because then I'd probably have to give up one of them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely good that you're able to do both and they can coexist.
Yeah, it's just odd that they both work in like the off season of the other. So like that's what I find weird about it.
Convenient and definitely strange.
Yeah. But not much else. Basically just getting moved in. Um, yeah, I'm like trying to think of anything else I'm really doing. I mean, the marching band takes up a lot of my time, so that's kind of most of it. Um, I've been playing a lot of Slay the Spire. I think that is usually it's like that's my non-Pokemon card game now. So, my goal is to get to Ascension 20 with all four of the characters. I just got Ascension 20 with the Ironclad, and I already had Ascension 20 with the silent, which basically it's a roguelike for those that don't know, and like each time you like beat the game, you can play it on like a harder difficulty, and it just kind of ramps up and up. So now I'm playing through the defect, who plays like completely differently than the other two, and um it's kind of fun. It's like it's probably gonna be like this one's a lot harder, and then when I go to the Watcher's like once you kind of figure out how to play the Watcher, it's like you pretty much should win like 95% of your games. But the defect, like I feel like mentally I had to think totally differently on like how to like actually build decks with him and like win. So it's kind of fun to like have to, it's like another puzzle to solve.
Definitely. Yeah, I know a lot of our local Pokemon group has really been into Slay the Spire at different times. I've played it a fair bit myself, but a couple of the design decisions as I got further into the game didn't resonate with me to the same extent. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic game. I feel like right now the problem that I have is that there are just too many fantastic games at once, too many things that I want to do, and not enough time to do them all. Um,
Well, ain't that the
that's
truth?
what it comes down to.
Yeah, man. Like, where were all these bangers when we were in college? We had so much more time.
Probably didn't feel as though there were as many of them because we were able to play them closer to when they
True.
came out.
Yeah, honestly, that's probably a lot of it.
Yeah, nowadays it's like, oh man, there are so many good games to play, and it's like the spread of games that I'm talking about came out over the last 6 years, and I just hadn't been able to play them yet.
Yeah, like, is there any that comes to mind?
So I got for the first time on the summer sale, I got the Binding of Isaac. I love roguelikes. I've never been able to play it though, and so that's one that's been around forever. But it's the newest, fanciest, updated version or whatever. Um, Played a game recently called the Norp Apolog, which was a really fun little kind of like an evolution to an idle game almost. Really enjoyed that. But yeah, I mean, even just looking through the spread of games from the the summer sale that I got, it's just a huge array of games that have come out 5, 6 years ago versus games that have come out just a couple of months ago. Right around when the time they were new, I played a game called Anode Heart, which was a really great creature collector game. That was like right at the end of last year. I played Baldur's Gate 3 right around when it came out. That was an amazing time. I'm not gonna go too deep into that because I think anything that I could say has already been said about that one. But there's always more to do when you have the amount of time that I think a lot of working adults have.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate fact of life. Well, at least there's still good games coming. Um, Anything else you want to close on this episode on?
I'm just really excited to be back. Really energized about Cube. I think you and I have a lot of ideas that we're excited to talk about and kind of get back into it. And really excited to engage with the community around the podcast as well, because that was always a really rewarding aspect of it when we were publishing it before.
Yep, I agree. I think getting to talk to listeners and getting feedback and hearing what topics you guys are interested in as well gives us motivation to make content. And I think we both have had a lot of great experiences since the last episode several years ago that we can now apply here. And I feel very rejuvenated now. I feel like we've got quite a few things we've even talked about for future episodes. So be on the lookout. Obviously, we'll be communicating if anything happens, but we haven't quite pinned down what the frequency of these episodes will be, but you can expect one at least in the next coming week. So stay tuned for that. That'll wrap us up for here. Again, thank you for listening. If you haven't yet, make sure to give us a comment, a like, and subscribe. Really helps grow the channel, and we'll see you guys next time.